Jimmy Kimmel was sitting at his desk in the Los Angeles studio, adjusting his tie before the next episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live. The lights of Hollywood flickered through the studio windows, and inside, the usual pre-show chaos buzzed. Producers chasing scripts, camera operators checking their gear, and the makeup room frantically prepping guests. Tonight promised to be special. Clint Eastwood, a cinematic legend, had agreed to appear on the show. For the over 55 audience, he wasn't just a guest. He was a symbol of an era, a man whose roles in Dirty Harry and Unforgiven had become part of their lives. But what was supposed to be an evening of nostalgia and light-hearted jokes quickly turned into something much more serious. Jimmy was flipping through his notes when his assistant, Caitlin, burst into the dressing room. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she held out a tablet. "Jimmy, we've got a problem," she said, her voice barely steady. "Have you seen what's going on social media?" "I don't read Twitter before the show, Caitlin." "You know that," Jimmy replied, leaning back in his chair. He tried to keep his tone casual, but her anxiety was contagious. "It's about Clint. Someone posted that he supposedly said something controversial about veterans. And people are furious. They're calling him a hypocrite because of all the heroic films he made. And now..." She trailed off, handing him the tablet. Jimmy looked at the screen. A post on X from an anonymous account claimed Clint Eastwood had called veterans spoiled whiners waiting for handouts at a private dinner. Below it, a storm of comments, outrage accusations, demands to cancel his appearance. Someone had even attached a photo of Clint with the caption, "Hero on screen, traitor in real life." Jimmy felt his throat go dry. He knew it might be fake. Disinformation in 2025 was a daily reality. But true or not, the storm was already raging. "Is he here yet?" Jimmy asked quietly. "Yeah, in the dressing room. And he's..." "Not in a good mood," Caitlin replied. "His agent called. Clint's heard about it and wants to go on air to explain everything." Jimmy rubbed his temples. This wasn't the first time the show faced something like this. But Clint Eastwood wasn't just another blogger or pop star. He was a guest respected by generations of Americans, especially the older viewers sitting at home, waiting to hear his gravelly voice and see that signature smirk. If Jimmy let him go on and it went badly, it could be a disaster. But if they canceled, people would see it as an admission of guilt. He stood up, adrenaline pumping, and headed to Clint's dressing room. The hallway smelled of coffee and hot studio lights, with the orchestra's tuning sounds mixing with the hum of ventilation. Jimmy knocked on the door and stepped inside. Clint was sitting in a chair before the mirror, his gray hair slicked back, his eyes squinting into the distance like one of his characters. On the table in front of him lay a pack of cigarettes. He hadn't smoked in 20 years, but always kept them nearby, like a talisman. When he saw Jimmy, he slowly turned his head. "Heard there's a fuss," Clint said in his low, raspy voice. "What are you planning to do about it, kid?" Jimmy forced a smile, though everything inside him was tight. "I was going to ask you the same thing. People think you said something about veterans. Something rough. And they're not happy." Clint snorted, leaning back in the chair. His fingers tapped the pack of cigarettes. "I didn't say that. But who cares? Somebody throws mud, and everyone rushes to smear it around. Classic story." "So it's not true?" Jimmy clarified, sitting across from him. "Of course not. I made American Sniper, for God's sake. My uncle was a Korean War vet. I'd rather shoot myself than say something like that." Clint leaned forward, his eyes sharpening. "But if I go out there and start defending myself, it's going to look like I'm guilty." Jimmy nodded. He understood how the public worked. Any denial could be seen as weakness, especially in an era when everyone had a camera in their pocket and an opinion in their head. "So what do you want? We can cancel. Say your voice is hoarse or something." Clint shook his head. "No, I'm going out, but I'll do it my way." Jimmy felt a chill down his spine. He knew that tone. It was the voice of a man who didn't back down. But what exactly did Clint mean? Your way. How? He asked cautiously. You'll see, Clint replied, a faint smile curling his lips. Just give me the first word. Meanwhile, tension was building in the studio. Audience members were scrolling through their phones, whispering about the scandal. Behind the scenes, producers argued over whether to let Clint go on or replace him with a backup guest, a stand-up comic with a new routine. But Jimmy returned to the desk with a determined look. We're sticking to the plan, he told the team. Clint's going on. Caitlin grabbed his arm. Jimmy, are you sure? If this goes wrong, they'll tear us apart. And not just on Twitter. Our viewers, the older crowd, they won't forgive this. I know, he said softly, but I believe him. The orchestra began playing the opening tune, the studio lights flared, and Jimmy stepped onto the stage to applause. His palms were sweating, but his smile stayed steady. Good evening, America, he began as always, with a weather joke about L.A. Tonight we have a very special guest. You know him, you love him, and maybe tonight you'll be surprised by him. Please welcome Clint Eastwood. The audience erupted into applause, though a faint murmur of discontent rippled through the claps. Clint walked onto the stage with slow, confident steps. His gray suit fit perfectly, his face unreadable. He sat across from Jimmy, the cameras zooming in to catch his every move. Clint, great to see you, Jimmy began, trying to keep the tone light. You know what people have been saying about you in the past couple of hours? Clint nodded, his eyes glinting. Yeah, and I'd like to say something about that. The room went silent. Jimmy felt his heart pounding. Whatever Clint had planned, it was about to happen. Clint Eastwood leaned back in his chair, his hands resting calmly on the armrests, but there was fire in his eyes, the same fire that once made his on-screen characters unforgettable. The room froze, waiting for him to speak. Jimmy Kimmel tightened his grip on the pen in his hand, trying to hide the tension building inside him with every second. The cameras hummed, silently capturing a moment that could either save the night or sink the show in scandal. I've heard people think I insulted veterans, Clint began, his voice slow but firm as stone. Someone out there wrote that I called them whiners, that I said they don't deserve respect. A whisper rippled through the room. Some audience members leaned forward, others crossed their arms, their faces a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Jimmy glanced quickly at the monitor. Social media was already exploding in real time. Is he apologizing? Tell the truth, Clint. Don't believe a word of it. The messages flashed by. I'm not going to sit here and prove I didn't say it, Clint continued, his tone a little sharper now. Because those who know me know I'd never disrespect people who served this country. My uncle came back from Korea with shrapnel in his leg and never complained. My father worked in a factory during World War II, so the army could have tanks. I made movies about heroes because I believe in them. But nowadays, the truth doesn't matter. People just want to throw a stone and watch the glass break. Jimmy felt the tension in the room ease slightly. Clint wasn't begging, he wasn't defending. He was speaking with a quiet confidence that made people listen. But it wasn't enough. The scandal was already burning, and the audience, especially the older ones, those who grew up on his films, wanted more than just words. They wanted answers. So what happened, Clint? Jimmy carefully stepped in. Where did the quote come from? Clint smiled, a thin, almost imperceptible smile that could mean anything. Someone made it up, maybe for laughs. Maybe to set me up. I was at dinner with friends 2 weeks ago, nothing special, just steak and a glass of wine. But someone from that night thought it'd be fun to make up a story. And here we are. The room buzzed. Jimmy felt a flicker of hope. If Clint could convince them it was a lie, maybe the show could be saved. But then a voice rang out from the back row, sharp, loud, with a distinct southern accent. Then why should we believe you? Shouted a man in his 60s, dressed in a denim jacket and a baseball cap, with a Veterans Organization logo. You Hollywood stars always lie when you get caught. Security stirred, but Jimmy motioned them to stop. He knew this was a pivotal moment. Clint turned to the man, his gaze calm but piercing. "What's your name, sir?" he asked. The man hesitated slightly but answered, "Bill. Bill Henderson." "Bill, did you serve?" Clint continued. "Yes, in Vietnam. 2 years," the man said, lifting his chin. Clint nodded, as if weighing that carefully. "I wasn't there," he said. "I didn't shoot or hide in the jungle. But I know what respect for those who did looks like. And if you think I'd call you or your brothers in arms whiners, then say to my face. Look me in the eye and tell me I'm lying." Bill blinked, his face reddening. He clearly hadn't expected that. The room held its breath, waiting for his response. Jimmy felt his heart pounding. This was the moment it could all either rise or collapse. I don't know," Bill muttered, looking down. "Just heard what people were saying." "People say a lot of dumb things," Clint replied. "The question is, are you going to listen to them or think for yourself?" The silence in the room became thick, almost tangible. Jimmy realized Clint wasn't just defending himself, he was challenging everyone, the audience, and those watching at home. But would it work? Then the voice of the show's director came through Jimmy's earpiece. "We've got a live call. Someone says they were at that dinner. They want to speak." Jimmy felt the ground shift beneath him. He looked at Clint, who just shrugged, as if to say, "Do what you gotta do." Jimmy nodded toward the director. "All right, let's hear them. Who's on the line?" The screen behind Jimmy lit up, live call-in. The voice on the other end was raspy, with a slight tremble, clearly someone elderly. "My name is Edna Crawford," the woman began. "I was at that dinner with Mr. Eastwood. And I want to say this is all a lie. He didn't say anything like that. We talked about old movies and how hard it is to find a good steak in LA. Someone young at the table was filming on their phone, probably where all this came from." The room erupted with whispers and gasps. Jimmy felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. He knew one witness wouldn't be enough to convince everyone. Then Clint raised his hand, asking for silence. "Thank you, Edna," he said. "But I don't want this to be about who heard what. I want us to talk about something more important. Why are we so quick to believe the worst? Why are we ready to tear each other apart over words that might not have even been said?" Jimmy saw where Clint was going. He wasn't just deflecting. He was shifting the entire conversation. And it was working. Audience members started nodding. Some even smiled. But Bill Henderson stood up again. "So you're saying we're all fools for believing it?" His voice was quieter, but still sharp. "No," Clint replied. "I'm saying we're all human. And sometimes we get it wrong. The question is, are we willing to admit it?" Bill sat down, his face thoughtful. Jimmy felt the tension in the room begin to lift, but the show wasn't over yet. What would happen next? Could Clint win them all back? And could Jimmy steer the evening back to comedy, or had this moment changed them both forever? Jimmy Kimmel felt the air in the studio grow lighter, as if someone had opened an invisible window and let in a breeze from the California hills. Clint Eastwood was still sitting across from him, his posture calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet strength that made everyone in the room, from the audience to the cameraman, unable to look away. Bill Henderson, a veteran from the back row, had sat back down, his face no longer tense but contemplative, as if he were rethinking everything that had just happened. But the show wasn't over yet, and Jimmy knew he had to bring the evening to a close, the kind of ending that would leave everyone feeling they had witnessed something special. "Clint," Jimmy began, his voice softer now, but still laced with humor, "you just turned my show into one of your films. Should I expect you to pull out a revolver and say, 'Come with me next'?" The audience laughed for the first time during the entire segment, and that laughter was like thunder after a long silence. Clint smiled his signature crooked smile, the one that gave him charm even at 94. "I left the revolver at home, Jimmy," he replied. "But if anyone wants to find out, we can settle it in the parking lot." The laughter grew louder, and Jimmy felt the tension finally melt away. He realized Clint hadn't just weathered the scandal. He had taken back control of the moment without raising his voice or losing his dignity. But Jimmy wanted more. He wanted the evening to be remembered not just as a moment of conflict, but as something that brought people together. "All right," Jimmy said, turning to the audience. "Let's do something. Bill, you still with us?" Bill Henderson lifted his head, surprised to be addressed again. "Yes, I'm here," he replied, his voice quieter now, but without the earlier edge. "You said you served in Vietnam," Jimmy continued. "Tell us one thing you want people to know about that time. Not about the war, but about you and your friends." Bill paused. The studio fell silent, and even Clint leaned forward, listening intently. Finally, Bill spoke. "We stuck together. Even when it was hell, we cracked jokes, shared the last piece of bread. I just want people to remember that we weren't just soldiers, we were human." Jimmy nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He looked at Clint. "What do you say, Clint?" Clint slowly stood up, not for drama, just because it was more comfortable. He looked at Bill, then at the audience. "I've made a lot of war films," he said, "but I could never show it all. What you just said, Bill, that's what I tried to capture. And if anyone thinks I disrespect that, then they don't know me." The audience erupted in applause, not loud like at a concert, but warm, heartfelt, the kind that comes from the soul. Bill nodded to Clint, and though he didn't smile, a glint appeared in his eyes, maybe gratitude, maybe reconciliation. Jimmy felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This wasn't just a television moment, it was something real. "You know what?" Jimmy said, standing up. "I think we all got a few things wrong tonight. Myself included. We're quick to believe the worst, but maybe it's time we start believing in something better. Clint, you agree?" Clint nodded. "I've lived a long life, Jimmy. And I'll say this, people will always argue, always throw dirt. But if you can look them in the eye and tell the truth, your truth, then you've already won." The applause swelled again, and Jimmy felt chills down his spine. He turned back to the camera. "We'll be right back after the break. But before we go, thank you, Clint, thank you, Bill, and thank you all. Let's remember we can be better, even when we mess up." The band played, the lights dimmed, and Jimmy sat down, feeling adrenaline give way to a calm warmth. Clint patted him on the shoulder as they walked backstage. "You held your own, kid," he said quietly. "Not everyone could have handled that." "Thanks, Clint," Jimmy replied. "But you made the night." Backstage, Caitlin rushed up to Jimmy, her eyes shining. "Did you see the live ratings? They spiked, and Twitter's exploding, but in a good way. People are saying this was the best segment in years." Jimmy smiled, but his thoughts weren't on the ratings. He was thinking about Bill, about Edna, about Clint, about the people who had shown tonight that even in a world full of shouting and blame, there's still room for dialogue. He glanced back at the studio, where the audience was still applauding, and saw Bill shaking hands with someone nearby, a small gesture, but one that meant a lot. The show went on, jokes, a musical number, another guest, but that moment with Clint lingered in the air like the scent of rain after a storm. Later, as Jimmy sat in his dressing room, removing his makeup, he turned on the TV. The news had already picked up the story. Clint Eastwood clears the air live. Veteran and star find common ground on Kimmel. But one headline caught his eye. The moment that reminded America how to listen. Jimmy turned off the TV and leaned back in his chair. Outside, Los Angeles sparkled with lights, and somewhere out there, in homes across the country, people over 55, those who had seen Vietnam, the Cold War, the highs and lows, were smiling at their screens. They felt heard. Their heroes still stood tall. And even one small step, one calm voice in the storm, could change everything. He didn't know if the scandals would end, or if the world would quiet down. But tonight, for just a moment, it felt like anything was possible. And that was enough to feel a kind of euphoria, not loud, but deep and quiet, the kind that stays with you.